All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're on the Delaware Valley. Welcome to the McMenamin Wing Show here on WWDB Talk 860. We've got a fantastic broadcast. We are here with our host, Tom Wing. How are you, sir?
Great to be here. How you doing?
Always a pleasure to be on location here at McMenamin Wing. And your colleague, the legendary Jay Shor. How are you, sir?
Very well. Always a pleasure to be with Joe Doc.
Well, it's right back at you, Jay. And so today's the theme of today's show, the world that we live in today in the practice of law, especially injury law, in the very, very competitive area of injury law. And typically we start off with our host, Tom Wing, but I'm going to ask Jay Shor, since he didn't become a legend, over the last 2 days, he's been around for a while. Jay, this is a different world when it comes to practicing law. A lot of saturated marketing out there, a lot of, there's a ton of platforms. But in general, what is the difference between when you started practicing law and today's world of, marketing across the board?
Joe, legal advertising wasn't always permissible. We were there when it first was ruled to be permissible. And television advertising was relatively inexpensive. People formed syndications to use it in different markets so that you could film one ad and tweak it for Philadelphia, for Denver, Colorado, for California, with a spokesman that either people knew or got to know. And you would watch your phone light up when a TV ad was on. Through the years, the advertising for television started to get more expensive as there was more demand. And so people went to what was then called the cheaper stations, 17, 29, 48.
In Philadelphia,
And we could buy cheaper there. At one point, though, it became obvious that the ones that wanted to attract the most clients went for billboards, went for newspaper advertising. Yellow Pages was big. But today there's something completely different, and it's called social media. And people are shopping for a law firm just like you would shop for a restaurant. I want to see some 5 stars. I want to read about people saying that the atmosphere was great. It wasn't too noisy. The Caesar salad was immaculate. That's what's happening in the field of shopping for a lawyer today.
And it's interesting because, Tom, one of the things at the firm here, you guys are a workers' compensation firm. And, amongst the best in the region. But like Jay just said, it's more than just being great lawyers. Okay. The law it's the business of law, and a big part of it is marketing. I always look at it in a sense. If there's a tree in the middle of the woods and it makes a sound and no one's, and it falls, does it make a sound if no one's listening? Okay. You are very cutting edge and understand the digital platforms and all those things. Talk about that as a priority along with running a great law firm for great clients.
Yeah, I think Jay's analogy of looking for a restaurant is a great one because your advertising has to cut through that atmosphere, that noise, if you will. It is incredibly saturated, especially on social media. If you go onto Facebook right now after searching Google for a lawyer, because these things follow you from website to website now, you're going to get a bunch of videos for all sorts of different lawyers. And so actually connecting genuinely with an audience is one of the most important things that you can do.
The area of injury law, okay, whether it's personal injury or workers' compensation, is particularly competitive across the board. And talk about, the efficiency and the education in a sense, because I've heard from a number of firms. I'll give you an example. Jim Beasley, for example, of the Beasley firm. He made it clear that in law school, because Temple Law School is named after his father, they don't teach the legal marketing. And so where do you get that education when you're getting out of law school, you want to learn how to, represent clients. And now, oh, by the way, you have to be a marketing whiz to compete in that field. As much as you, especially if you're firm owners, and you guys have been, where do you get that education?
So I think for us, it's a mix, right? You bring in the right people, you work with the right partners, but a lot of it is also just for us is being genuine, right? I do a ton of social media, I do a ton of videos. I'm just putting out educational content. I'm not trying to run an advertisement. It's not this, every lawyer on every feed going, pick me, pick me, pick me.
Right.
Someone will write a comment and say, hey, what do I need to do if I have an injury at work and I'm worried I'm going to get fired? And that'll be a topic for a video, and I'll just answer their question. It doesn't say call me. It doesn't say pick me. In fact, my contact information doesn't even appear in the video. Now, if you want to get to know me a little bit, you can click on my profile. You can scroll down and send me a message. But it's not in your face advertising. We're just putting out information amongst all of the other noise.
What's interesting? Go ahead, Jay.
I was going to say getting the client and then making a client happy are very much related, because those 5 stars that you're going to get on social media come with comments. And those comments are from people that you represented that were happy with your representation and happy with the result that you got for them. That's how you get a 5-star.
Okay. So it's interesting that you bring that up, because when we look at the world of the practice of law today in the competitive injury area, okay, what you said there, Jay, so I just equate it to this: a boat with a hole in it. If you have a great marketing campaign and you're great lawyers and you've done an awesome job, but let's just say your receptionist retires, or one of your key intake people and you just have one little mistake, prioritize intake. You now have a boat where you have a leak in that. You're doing everything right, but it doesn't matter unless the rubber meets the road and you have a team of intake yourself as attorneys. I mean, customer service, with everything we're talking about, great marketing, great representation, but talk about the priority of obviously being able to treat that client the way they deserve to be treated.
Yeah, I mean, if you put in an advertisement, we're going to treat you like family. You have direct access to lawyers. We are there for you 24/7. Call us right now. And then your experiences, you pick up the phone and call that lawyer at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday and you get a voicemail. That's your 1-star review. So the advertising, or what you are putting out into the world, especially in today's day and age, has to match what you're actually going to do. And so having the right intake people, having the right team on board, having the right lawyers, right? These people have to be, especially in the injury space, empathetic, compassionate, and they have to be smart, and they have to be responsive. The number one complaint to all disciplinary boards across the country, pick your state, is about lawyer communication. Lawyers not communicating with their clients, not explaining what's going on.
Okay. So, Jay, I'd like to comment on that, because you guys have mentioned Google reviews. Okay. And I wonder, so I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, okay, so you got to be a good lawyer. You got to be a great marketer. You got to have a good intake team. Okay. Oh, and by the way, as an attorney, there are standards, and what else do I need? Do I need a cape? Okay. You know what I mean? Having the whole picture, and talk about that, Jay, because you have hired a lot of lawyers in your day. Yeah. I think that guy was one of them.
Including me.
Right. But imagine, and that you find out down the road that Bob over here, although he was number 1 in this class at an Ivy League school, doesn't quite know how to talk. You got everything else right. The client's in the office, and yet, so I guess what I'm saying is every base needs to be covered.
Well, if you take an injured worker and you picture him at a computer shopping for a law firm, would he hire a firm that had 25-star ratings, or would he look at a firm that had 200 with a 4.8-star rating? And the only way you can get to answer that is to think in terms of other services like restaurants and plumbers and so on and so forth. People will give you a little bit off of that 5-star rating, but they love 5 stars. So when someone in your law firm treats someone wrong and they end up doing a bad review, that's devastating. You can't have that in this day and age.
How immediate? Let's talk about them Google reviews, because I heard an attorney say it the other day. How impacting are they?
They're very important. So they're important for 2 reasons. One, we've talked about consumers use them, consumers love them. The second is Google's own ranking, and now moving into artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, Claude, ChatGPT, Grok, use reviews in part of what these models use to determine what services they're going to recommend as the best or the most experienced or the most client focused. They'll read reviews. If you go into ChatGPT and say, tell me how Tom Wing is as a lawyer, it's going to give you a lot of very specific feedback about cases I've handled, about settlements I've gotten, about reviews clients have left. And luckily, it's very positive for me. But lawyers that might have like discipline histories and things like that were a little more difficult to find in years past, it's all instantly accessible. And those reviews become very, very important. I'll add one thing to it, though, Joe, is that 4.8 or that 4.9 star rating may not matter, but as I will do, and I'm sure everybody here does, when you're looking at a 4.8 star rated, restaurant or bar or whatever it is, you're going to sort by lowest first. You're going to read those negative reviews and you're thinking to yourself, is this person crazy? And if the person's crazy, you're going to write off that 1 or 2 1-star reviews. Yeah. But if it's a very specific, detailed note and the business hasn't even replied to it to say, hey, give us a call, let's fix this, something like that, you're still going to think twice about that place. So how you handle negative reviews is important too.
Intake. Okay. Somebody calls. It's a very competitive world. Okay. And we know how important it is from a conversation standpoint and how the bedside manner is important. Let's talk about efficiency. They'll never get to the bedside manner if they're not only talking to an answer machine, but they don't get a call back for a specific amount of time. What is the rule of thumb when you talk about, getting back to somebody and the communications at the get-go?
I can tell you the best practices is you assume that if you don't pick up that phone and sign that client on that first phone call, they've hired someone else. Mm-hmm. So anything less than that is less than ideal. Certainly some people are going to want to think about it. In catastrophic claims, it's very, very different. Sometimes you have to go to a hospital or meet with family somewhere else.
Yeah.
But in sort of the standard injury claim where it's okay, they're going to go through some physical therapy. They just want to talk to a lawyer, have somebody in their corner and get a good settlement at the end. If you don't sign that person on that first phone call, your likelihood of actually signing that person on drops dramatically.
What about after hours? Imagine you get a call at midnight or even during the middle of the night.
I would say most reputable firms have a 24/7 answering service that's going to pick up the phone and call a lawyer that's on call and get them on the phone.
Okay, in the middle of the night.
Yep.
All right. Jay, talk about it back in the day.
Well, Joe, one of the things that hasn't changed is the most incredible form of getting a new client is a referral from a happy client that you represented. Because I think it's part of human nature, especially in men, when you hear something like, I got injured and I don't know who to turn to, a guy will say, I got a guy for you. And that goes for plumbing, electrical, everything you can think of.
I just said it to my guy who was looking for a car. I got a guy for you. He lives next door to me.
People love to refer.
Yeah.
And if you create a happy client, or we call them a referral person, they're going to keep doing that. They're going to keep sending you clients. And that is still the cheapest and the most valuable way to get a client. But when you get to the point of making a client happy, then you're talking about a lot of different things during the representation.
Yeah. So AI, we're going to get into, and you mentioned that, Tom. But let's. I've heard on several broadcasts where a young lawyer might say, or some, that AI is coming in, it's going to put us all out of work. And I sit there, and one of the things, I'm a talk show host, so that's one thing. But I'm not a lawyer, but I am a regular person. And so one of the observations I have, okay, is that the law is personable. Success and a business model don't get into the hospitality business if you're not going to be hospitable, okay? Well, it's almost no different, especially in injury law. In other words, that key, and that can't be done with a computer. In other words, they want to have that sense of, I have a relationship with my attorney. How big a part of a client, not just acquisition, but maintenance, is having, that demeanor, that empathetic demeanor, like you said, Tom, to be there for that individual, because this is an incredibly hard time. I can only imagine, including patients, okay, because this is, the insurance companies toy with them, with a lot of injured workers and injury victims like there is no tomorrow. Talk about the importance of empathy and creating that relationship. That's one thing AI will never do. Tom,
well, Tom can go into this in more detail, but you talked about bedside manner.
Yeah.
You talked about the time when doctors used to come to your house, and they never just stayed with the medicine. They asked about your mother, your father, your sister.
They were part of your family almost, because they would.
And what some people forget in the practice of law is you're talking to a human being that's going through something that's very difficult. They like to be at work. They don't want to be home. They're in pain. You have to be able to go beyond the case and give them a little bit of bedside manner. How are you feeling today? What do you do with your time? Are you trying to get out a little bit and walk? You have to make some conversation. This is what makes them feel part of the team. Tom, what do you think about that?
I 100% agree. I think authenticity is one of the most important qualities you can have as a lawyer. Being empathetic with your clients, but being truthful with that, right? You're not putting up some face. You're not, just telling them what they want to hear. You get to know them. Then you become invested in their cases, by the way, and you're going to work a lot harder for these people that really, really need it. And because you're dealing, when you're saying,
It's
empathy,
personal.
bedside manner, you're dealing with people who are at the very worst point of their lives. Having a work injury and having it upend your ability to keep a roof over your head is incredibly traumatic for somebody.
When you're building a firm, and HR. By the way, we didn't throw in HR. It isn't enough so far. Okay. And putting a team around yourself. Okay. And I can say that, I had a hospitality business, found out a year and a half in that my person at the desk treated everybody like crap. She treated me great. But my point is, I was not an expert in HR and making those positive decisions. And I've seen some law firms, some good people, some great firm owners learn the hard way. Talk about the importance of surrounding yourself with a great team, and at the same time, you almost got you got to do it from day one. You make one mistake in that, putting that team together could be a problem.
So I think you're absolutely right. I'm going to let Jay talk on this, because the foundation of what we have here is something that Jay built. And that is a lot of the people that work for us that formerly did work for Jay's former firm have touched this system in some way, meaning they were injured workers. Yeah. They are the spouse or cousin or friend or neighbor of an injured worker, and they understand.
They know what it's like.
For the people they're going to be interacting with, what they're dealing with. And I think that's incredibly important.
Yeah. We had the luck of having our team stay with us for years. I mean, decades. And it takes a couple things. First of all, just like that client has to have trust in you and be happy with your representation, your team has to be happy too. And that involves pay, quite frankly. It involves handling them in a professional manner and treating them like a way that you're referring to them who's somebody who's important to the team. Those are the things that make a person happy and make a person want the success of who they work for. It's not just good enough to get a check. They want to be happy to say, I work for McMenamin Wing. You know them.
Well, it's interesting because when you're hiring somebody, it starts there. I mean, literally speaking, somebody could have all the education in the world, and by the way, they're good for. There's a place for everybody in the world. They may be a great key cog in another situation, but my wife used to complain to me sometimes because she ran the desk at a high fashion salon in Center City for 25 years. That she wished she stuck with hairstyling and all that. And I said to her, she in a positive sense she looked at that job like it was ownership. Like, in other words, not that it was possessive ownership, but she understood that every client that came in there was important to the operation of that business. So she understood. And I said, hon, it's harder to find somebody like you than a brain surgeon on Market Street. Okay. How do you kind of sieve through that? In other words, you might have 20 people coming to the office for a job. If you get one of those people that's ultra competitive and has a personality situation, it could ruin the chemistry in the entire, and I'm sure it's happened to all of us. Talk about that process, Jay, and the actual interview process to be able to have that team that treats your clients the way they treat them.
In a way, it's hard because there are certain questions you're not permitted to ask.
Joe Dougherty.
Ones that you don't even think of. You can't ask like a group of questions to try to find out a person's age, like what year did you graduate from high school?
Yeah.
I mean, they know all the tricks. So what is it, Tom? It's an inside feeling, some kind of something you get from the person you're interviewing, and then you take the chance.
You call references. I asked that question because you guys have been incredibly successful. And every one of these things we're talking about is about not only client acquisition, but it's about what they're going to experience when they walk in to McMenamin Wing. And I'll sit there, I've met your team, and I feel like I've known them my whole life, right? And so that doesn't happen. And one of the greatest pride, aside from your great track record with clients, is what you just said. The client, your team stays for years. They've been there for decades, which creates a great atmosphere. It's not that all. It's that starts at the day one when somebody comes in for that interview, and that's what I'm talking about. Like, in other words, you might not be able to ask some of those simple questions.
Joe, there is a challenge, and it came as a result of COVID, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Because people started working from home, and that hasn't stopped. It's gone back a little bit, but there's a lot of empty office space throughout Center City. I can guarantee you that. And what has happened is it's more difficult to establish a relationship between paralegals and intake staff when you got them all over the place. But it can be done, and we do it.
Let's talk about a little bit about Zoom, okay? The business of law has changed. Okay. And I know you guys are you would love to be sitting in the same office and the clients all come and you accommodate that. But a lot of clients, for convenient purposes, and, they want to, they could be in Pittsburgh. They could be, and they want the prestige of a Philadelphia area law firm. Okay. A McMenamin Wing. And so now, the convenience, they no longer have to drive 50 minutes if they're, obviously if they're in Pittsburgh, 5 hours. But the point is they have the luxury of now being able to retain a law firm like yourself when they didn't before. But talk about how Zoom has impacted, the practice of law and in a positive way because it's a convenient to the client.
I think it's not just Zoom, it's technology, right? Because it used to be that someone would call the office and you'd either schedule them to come in and have an appointment and sit down with the lawyer in a big fancy conference room in an office downtown. And you'd take 2 hours of that lawyer's time to go through every piece of paper they thought might be relevant from 20 years ago. And now, or you have to send somebody out to their house. And now they can pick up the phone, and from the very first phone call to that lawyer until the very end of their case, in many cases, they don't have to leave their house. So the guy that fell off a ladder and just got out of the emergency room, whose back is killing him,
right?
He can handle his whole case from the comfort of his bed or his doctor's office. I mean, more than half of the court hearings where we have testimony now, those are done virtually on Teams or Zoom or something like that. And I think it creates a lot more access for people who otherwise are just not going to be able to physically do it. It's also made the practice much more efficient. It's got to be saving the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania buckets of money because you don't need all this courtroom space and security staff. There's a huge apparatus that has to be in motion just to get lawyers and the general public in the door. They just don't need anymore.
Jay?
Joe, we talked about that trust you try to establish in that bedside manner. It's even more important today because you can have a client that you never met except on the phone and maybe on a virtual court appearance, but no shaking hand, no standing next to the guy.
I was going to ask you if you could have ever imagined that.
Yeah, I mean, who could imagine that? You couldn't. But that trust that you develop is so, so important. It's also important because you're going to recommend at some point in your representation to take a certain amount of money or to do a certain thing that seems a little unnatural for the client. And if he has that trust, he's going to say, I'm going with you. I'm going with what you're saying. So it's a very important asset to have in a relationship.
Let me ID the show. You're listening to the McMenamin Wing Show here on WWDB Talk 860. We're with our host, Tom Wing, and the legendary Jay Shor. And we're talking about the world of practice and the practice of law today. And it's such a different and competitive market. But I'll tell you one thing that doesn't change: the importance of the representation of law for that client. Okay, and when you look at individuals during their worst, the pain still somebody with a broken leg feels the same pain as today as they did back when in your early years.
Yes.
When I think about what individuals go through, okay, and the relationships they go through with the insurance companies, okay, and with their medical situation, there is something called an IME, okay, and we talked about it. And first of all, what is it, and how does it impact either the case long term and at least in an acute way at the time it happens?
Well, an IME it has a title called an independent medical examination, which has bothered me for all the years I've been involved in workers' comp, because it should be called a defense medical examination.
Sure.
But we stick with what we have. Now, this is by law, the insurance companies are entitled to have one every 6 months. Every 6 months. They don't all do it every 6 months, but your client must go to it. If he doesn't go, there are repercussions. Tom, talk about that.
Yeah, if you don't go to an IME, what ends up happening is the employer is going to hire a lawyer. They're going to file a petition to compel that exam, meaning a judge is now going to step in and tell your client to do what they should have done already. If they still don't go to an exam, that judge can suspend that injured worker's benefits until they go to an exam. That could be 6 months until the next exam. And so it is really important that lawyers are counseling their clients. You have to go to these exams. You have to cooperate with them, even though these doctors are not objective.
Yeah. And so, go ahead, Jay.
Well, I was going to say, medicine can be looked at from different angles. Our doctors look at it from a certain angle. The insurance company doctors look at it from a different angle. Usually, an insurance doctor will say that your client is capable of doing either the job that he did before he was injured, or he can do a sedentary job. He gives the the employer something to work with to get them off of comp. quite frankly. That's their job. Our doctors will prolong the.
I like to say knock them off.
Well, okay. Yeah. But the point is that, just to say that a client can go back to work light duty with a rotator tear that's just been surgically repaired or something. I mean, come on. There's pain involved in this. If it's a dominant arm, what's he going to do? What's he going to use his left arm all the time? It's not going to work. So you have these two differences of opinions which make up a case. Now, one of the things that you learn after reading hundreds, maybe thousands of IMEs is that you're going to get a bad review by the IME doctor. Once in a blue moon, they say, you know what? Your client's messed up. Tom, how many times have you seen that?
It's probably less than 1% of cases where we get the report back and the defense attorney picks up the phone and calls you before you even open the email and says, we're going to start paying your guy. Usually it's the mixed bag. They can go back to work at whatever nonsense job was offered or the full duty job like Jay was talking about.
Well, so you read these things, and over the years, one thing just got to me eventually because they use the term symptom magnification. So you think of your client in there, the client knows the doctor is on the other side, and the client may give a little facial thing to show pain, or maybe move a little differently to show to the doctor that the pain still exists. Well, if that's what the doctor's talking about, that's one thing. So I developed a system of saying to the doctor, when you use the term symptom magnification, are you saying that my client indeed has symptoms and just exaggerated them? Or are you saying that my client has no symptoms at all? Well, doctors don't like that, because if they say to you, well, your client has symptoms, you got a little bit there. You got something to use in the brief. If they say you have no symptoms, you can go back to your doctor and the doctor will say, in effect, that's ridiculous. The medicine is clear that she has symptoms or he has symptoms. So it's a kind of a question that you have to develop. You never argue with a defense doctor. You're going to lose. They're doctors. You're not. They know anatomy. They know everything. So if you can get a little bit here, a little bit there, you've done your job.
Yeah, and I've heard the same thing about defense medical exams, that the name independent medical exam is misleading. Let's do this. Let's take a break. We're going to have more from the McMenamin Wing Show in just a minute. All right, thanks for joining us here today on the McMenamin Wing Show here on WWDB Talk 860. We're on location at McMenamin Wing in their beautiful offices in Jenkintown, PA. And so as we continue our conversation, we're talking about independent medical exams. And like Jay Shor said, they're regularly referred to by, people that know better as defense medical exams. And so having said that, Tom, you wanted to add a little to that conversation because, like Jay said, they're really not independent medical exams. Jump in, if you will.
Sure. So one of the things that stuck out to me that Jay said is you don't typically fight medicine with a doctor, right? Almost no lawyer who's doing workers' comp has gone to medical school. There are doctor lawyers. There aren't that many of them out there, but they do exist. But for the most part, you don't want to be in the trenches arguing medicine with the doctor. But obviously we win cases, right? So we have to score points somewhere. And so there are a number of different strategies we use to do that. And one of the examples was Jay's famous cross of symptom magnification. And one of my favorite answers to that question is when the doctor doesn't want to give the, oh yeah, he has some symptoms, and instead says no pain. Because there's no objective test for pain. Pain is a subjective symptom. The patient tells you, I have symptoms. Now, a doctor, based on their professional experience and qualifications, is going to take that along with the physical exam and relevant medical records and say, okay, that symptom is part of this larger diagnosis. And then they're going to render an opinion based on that. But they don't know what level the pain is. They don't know if they're having it that day or if they've ever had it at all. They just know, based on their experience, what other patients have reported. And so there are many questions you can ask a physician about that. The other thing we'll do is a lot of times when the doctor is testifying for the defense, it's because they're trying to get the injured worker off of workers' comp and back into the workforce. And the injured worker is saying, look, I can't use my arm. And so a lot of times you'll get a guy, he goes out and has shoulder surgery. And then 8 weeks later, they go to an IME and that IME doctor says, yep, surgery worked, go back to work full duty. And the guy's working in a warehouse lifting. You got the minimum weight there. The max weight is going to be like 50 pounds or something like that. Well, I'll say to the doctor, okay, so you've cleared him to do full duty, no restrictions. That's usually what the report says. Full duty, no restrictions. Yes. Okay. Well, you would clear a guy who had, shoulder reconstructive surgery to lift a 50-pound box over his head. Now, no self-respecting doctor is going to allow anybody that has shoulder surgery to do that.
Right.
But that's a point because the judges know this, right? We don't have to pitch our cases to a jury like a personal injury lawyer does. We're pitching our case to a workers' comp judge who hears hundreds of these cases and will decide thousands of them in their career. And they're going to know that that's nonsense. And we're going to be able to bring our doctor in to kind of go down the list and say, okay, well, this is what the American Medical Association says. This is what the impairment ratings, or this is what the impairment guides say with regard to this particular injury. This is what the orthopedic boards say are the permanent restrictions for somebody with this condition. And it's really persuasive to judges where you can kind of pick apart just the recommendations. Because a lot of times you're not going to win on did you really not have this test on the physical exam be positive? You're not going to win that argument with
the credibility of the of a doctor that's I've thought about. I don't know. This sounds like a regular scenario, but being an iron worker, we're climbing columns and beams. You guys have represented iron workers and construction workers your entire careers. But if I have an issue with my shoulder, and I knew an iron worker recently that had it. He wasn't exact. He was a foreman though. But imagine I'm an iron worker. I'm doing a lot of climbing. Now we used to think that, no one really made a big deal out of us, but on TikTok now you see a lot of iron workers climbing beams and stuff. What you would see of us was the guys eating lunch on the beam, right? The old time photo. But now I got to climb with the shoulder. And this doctor was sending me back to work. And I'm making, so if I'm a union iron worker, I'm making a hell of a lot more working than I am not working, but I got to get better.
Oh, yeah. And you get maxed out on comp. A lot of the union guys get maxed out. You make like $1,300 and change a week on comp. And you could have been clearing $2,000-$3,000 a week on a nice job.
That's right. But now this doctor has put me in danger. What happens? And I don't know if this is, I know you guys have seen it all, but what happens if somebody goes back to work, climbing that beam, climbing that column, walking the beam, reaches out for a piece. I'm thinking of a million different such scenarios. And he's up, 99% of the time, you're up 2 floors, it's enough to get killed.
So your thought is if you get hurt, right.
You get hurt because he sent you back to work because you didn't heal.
So in most states, that's not even going to be malpractice. And you've hit on a very, very important cross point that you can use, which is this doctor, the only skin they have in this game is the money paid to them by the insurance company. There is no doctor-patient relationship. There are no HIPAA protections. They have no medical relationship with the injured worker. They are there for the sole purpose of litigation. You can ask the doctor about that. You say, well, you didn't give Joe Schmo any medical advice, did you? And in fact, they're not supposed to, right? Their job is to give an evaluation at the request of an insurance company for the purposes of litigation.
So how long, Jay, do some of these IME, exams last?
They're very short. One of the criticisms you hear when a client reads an IME report is I was only in there for 20 minutes and he shortened me on the history. I couldn't get it all out. And the exam was quick. And I think it's not a very good example of a a doctor's examination. That happens all the time.
So how does the judge now, you have, and I'm going to take a shot at this, but you have your expert who may be the treating doctor who's treated this individual for the last year and a half. Okay. How does there even any credibility in somebody who meets somebody for 15, 20 minutes and that individual, and I'm an iron worker, but I'm going to throw this out there. How long you been treating this individual? You only gave him an exam for 20 minutes. You have very little history, but the history that's in front of you. How is this even credible compared to somebody who's treated somebody legitimately for a year?
Joe, that's why there's different judges, and there's judges that lean one way and judges that lean another way. And most of them try to be fair, but everybody has built-in ways of thinking. And you have to kind of put that into the formula when you're representing a client. I mean, Tom will tell you, we talk all the time. How's this judge? Pretty good on so-and-so and so forth. We can't shop like they used to do in common pleas court. We get what we get.
Well, let me ask you this question. You guys go head to head with representing your clients to the fullest when it comes to everything. But one area is you're in court. You're in an adversarial situation with the defense attorney who's in the same position. Not sure how they shave their guys. If they actually can look at themselves in the mirror, but that's just me. But the reality is, we've had some good defense attorneys on the shows, and they've been good shows. Having said that, though, Tom, you've said that just because you're going, nose to nose and dropping everything, all you got for your client doesn't mean that the collegiality has to be, anything but. Talk about that and how really, in a sense, it benefits your client. So, because you're not getting lost in the process.
Yeah. So one of the great things about the workers' comp bar in Pennsylvania that the injury bar does not share is the practice is very small and very collegial. And so everybody generally gets along, meaning I can pick up the phone. I get a new case in the office. I see the other side filed a termination petition. My client is trying to look for a job. I can pick up the phone, call the defense attorney, and have a conversation about that case with them. And that guy's not going to lie to me. He's not going to gaslight me about the case. We just have a conversation about the case and move the ball. All right, well, we need, why don't we agree on what the trial schedule should be so that when we go to court, we're ready to go. And it doesn't mean I'm not going to go toe to toe to them in a deposition. It doesn't mean I'm not going to make all the objections I need to make. But you can be a professional collegial attorney without jumping down the defense attorney's throat on every issue in every case. But it means your case is handled much more efficiently. And by the way, that defense attorney may well go out on a limb for you if you're really pushing an issue with a defense lawyer, right? And you're saying, no, you have undervalued this case and you're getting fired up about it. You aren't getting fired up about every other issue in the case, but that issue, when it really matters,
right?
That defense attorney is going to take you seriously. They're going to go bat for you with that insurer and go get the money.
Jay, you've been doing this, for decades, and you've been in all kinds of situations when it comes to, representing your client and being in court. And I'm sure, taking a shot at this one, that you've seen individuals that are the exact opposite of what Tom's saying. Somebody who's just got an axe to grind on every issue, just thinks it's their job based upon what, to be adversarial at every situation. And in a sense, maybe even is prickly to the judge or everybody involved. A, how do you handle that? And B, is that in a sense not benefiting their own client, even the insurance company, if they're making such a spectacle?
Well, first of all, Tom said that there's a small community of workers' comp lawyers, and there is. Everyone knows who they are that are tough and hard to deal with. We could give you 5 names now, but we're not going to.
I almost told you not to say anybody's names.
But for the most part, again, Joe, bedside manner, goes to defense attorneys, goes to adjusters. If an adjuster likes you and you made a joke or you said something out of the ordinary and they enjoyed the conversation, they may go to bat for you.
They don't have an axe to grind of a different type.
Exactly. And you're going to be asking for money at some point. A defense attorney is going to have to go back to his client and say, I need 100,000 or 120. These are people that are going to go to bat for you or are going to say, hey, this guy I don't like, and I'm going to do everything I can do to make his life miserable. It's bedside manner again.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, you know, in a sense, it has to. I'm not saying everybody has to be a natural at it, and it's hard to kind of teach somebody to perform. But at the same time, you got to have a sense of that. How do you when you're that I'm sure you've the importance of knowing the judges. I don't mean personally, but I'm saying having represented a client in front. That the judges themselves have different idiosyncrasies that you should be aware of.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Of course.
Yeah. I think this is a know your audience, right? There's a joke you might tell in front of your friends from colleges. You might not tell your kids.
Right.
So the same is true with judges. They're human beings. Everybody and in fact, judges have their own rules in workers' comp court here in Pennsylvania. So you got to look at their rules, and we're all generally familiar, right? We know what judges want to hear a first hearing filing, what judges want a 45-day filing, what judges want your client prepared to testify at a first hearing, which used to happen in every case in front of almost every judge and now is fairly uncommon. What kind of evidence and what doctors judges tend to like. Sometimes judges will make comments in trial lists like, oh, that doctor at the Rothman Institute is fantastic. He operated on my Aunt Edna. Well, guess who we're sending my next client to who has a case in front of that judge? Because if your witness is already in the eyes of that judge, somebody who is trustworthy and worthy of belief, and that person's qualified to help your client, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think about it, and what ultimately does it come down to? When it comes down to a judge making a decision?
I think Jay already said it. Why don't you take this?
I'm going to tell you one thing, and I promise this for Tom as he goes through the years of being a workers' comp attorney. Joe, I can get away with a lot right now in my senior status with judges. They seem to like the older ones coming back. They remember things from the past, and you have to use whatever you have. It's like being a closer in a baseball game. If you have a curveball, use it. If you have a sinker, use it. That's the same thing with being a workers' comp lawyer. Whatever you have, use it. Your goal is to get your client a good settlement or a good result.
Well, you've been around a while. You were the actual individual who created workers' compensation settlements. So you're going to get some leeway because, there's a lot of people living lives today because Jay Shor decided to go into workers' compensation. And one of the things that, that respect, okay, and understand, first of all, if Jay stopped at my house, if you were one of those guys who sold the electric and they have different, I just switch every time you came. Okay, we got a new provider, hon. But having that, that respect and having done it for a long time, when you look at the new attorneys and how has it changed in regards to, Tom said it's a small bar. How has it changed, since you started the game?
I think back when I started, we didn't have the confidence that the new ones seem to have right off the bat. I don't know where they get it, but they seem to show a certain confidence almost from the get-go that we learned to kind of stay quiet for a while.
But in a sense, though, you guys are kind of creating. So I've heard stories where, you guys are the ones that actually became workers' compensation attorneys. There was a time when, personal injury personal injury attorneys would do it, and not really with expertise. So I could see why, as you guys are creating the laws and doing those things where there was some uncertainty. But I look at this like the young guys are benefiting from the fruits of your labors.
Well, they have. But don't forget, we used to go to a Malvern court in workers' comp that was in a motel, and you had to walk past the pool and you smelled the chlorine before you got to the judge's office. I mean, it's become a lot more official and quite frankly, professional.
Is there anything, if I was to talk to a young Jay Shor, and I was to tell you that in 30 years, this is the way, these are the conditions of which workers' comp is going to be, that you would say, no way. Is there anything that surprises you today? And maybe that's Zoom, or maybe, the practice of law, where your budget now is going out a large portion to massive marketing.
I think, Joe, the biggest change is, again, COVID, because before COVID, you would go to Allentown in the morning for one hearing, maybe two, and then you'd do a deposition in the afternoon. That was your day. Today, because of COVID, because of the computer, the virtual hearings, you can do 5 hearings in a day. You can be in Wilkes-Barre in the morning, Harrisburg at noon, and Chambersburg at 4:30.
And speaking of that, does that change your strategy a little bit? Where I imagine if I'm a nervous person, I've done a couple of depositions when I was in business, when we had a hospitality facility, and a slip and fall or something like that and you're face to face with somebody at that point, it can get a little nerve wracking. I mean, I wasn't nervous, but the guy was, right? But the point is, you're now in, doing a Zoom deposition. Does that change your strategy with your own client? Because they may feel more comfortable being on Zoom. They don't have that ensuring, that person in their face. At the same time, you can't be there to counsel them.
Yeah, it absolutely changes the strategy. And some clients, we have come into the office. So even if they're going to be virtual, they'll come sit in our conference room and then we'll prep them. So it does change the strategy a little bit, but it's not as significant as you might think. Although I would say there is one, we've talked about a lot of the positives of all this remote virtual stuff.
Sure.
But I know it looks like we only have about 2 minutes left, but there is one downside, and it has to do with the younger lawyers. They don't get to watch the older lawyers or the other young lawyers make mistakes anymore. Right. And Jay has really taken on a great role here in kind of training this new class of lawyers. We have, we just hired another associate. So we've got 3 associates on staff now. And trying to nurture that is very different when you can't send them to the Malvern trial list to go watch somebody get yelled at.
I've heard that's
the first hearing I ever covered was in Malvern, and I got yelled at. And that's almost a rite of passage. Every lawyer, Jay told a story on this program of when he left his file home. I never forgot that story. Yeah. I never forgot my story. Every lawyer has one, except the lawyers that are practicing since COVID.
Wow. I mean, I've heard a lot of the young attorneys they may not realize it as much, obviously, but they don't get to see it, walk in Jay Shor's office and pick his brain for,
they get 15. To do that. But it's the watching other lawyers make mistakes. Okay. Or if you used to watch like 10 settlement hearings in a row before your case.
Well, I was talking about actually during the pandemic when you couldn't come into the office.
Sure. No.
Yeah.
But in the old days, you'd have 30 lawyers in the back of a given courtroom and waiting for the judge to call your case. And so you heard everything you could possibly hear. Well, Judge, I need a continuance because the dog ate my homework or whatever. And you'd learn that the judge didn't like that or the judge did like it. Those are the little things you learn that they can't learn anymore.
All right. So we've come to the end of the fastest hour in radio. Jay, always a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you, Joe.
It's a treasure. And of course, Tom, contact information if somebody wants to get in touch with you or Jay.
Sure. You can find us at workerscompadvocates.com.
Fantastic. Listen, I want to thank everybody for tuning into the McMenamin Wing Show here on WWDB Talk 860. Of course, we want to thank Jay Shor and Tom Wing from McMenamin Wing. Of course, Matt Dietz, our producer. On behalf of everybody on the panel, I'm Joe Dougherty. Thanks for listening, everybody.